discussion, a conversation amongst friends. I have to say that I haven't been this nervous in a long time because it's been an honor to prepare for this panel, because it's been an honor to work alongside Alden Nielsen for all these years and participate in all those projects with him. So I'm just very happy that we get to do this for him with a panel of friends, one of which couldn't come today. Kathy Lou Schultz was held back at home, so she couldn't be there, but she sends her regards, and I know she's with us somewhere. So I'm just going to read a few notes and then we'll get the conversation going. Our keynote at the symposium, Alden Nielsen is a preeminent scholar of American poetry, and more particularly of African American poetry. His towering presence in the field has led to many important publications, among which stands the seminal Black Chant that has influenced critics of Black poetry for more than 25 years now. His publications and journals are too numerous to list here, but suffice it to say that his scholarly output is impressive and sustained. He's also a leading anthologizer of African American verse. His work with Lori Ramey have led to 2 anthologies, Every Goodbye Ain't Gone and What I Say. Last year he edited a selection of Hugh Walthall's poems, and he's also at the forefront of the literary legacy of poet critic Lorenzo Thomas, having recently published alongside with the help of Laura Varana, collected poems with Westland. But Alden Nielsen is also an accomplished poet, ever present on the poetry reading circuit. He has published 9 collections of poems, beginning with the 1985 collection Heat Strains to 2018's You Didn't Hear This From Me, and more in the pipeline, I'm sure, probably 4 or 5 at the same time. He published poems in numerous poetry journals, anthologies, and through series like 33 and a third, and idiosyncratic projects like his tiny book titled Entrance Only Do Not Enter, a title that summarizes well the ironic tone that runs through the ode. Aesthetically and thematically diverse, the poetry draws from various influences, from Oulipo to free jazz via Charles Olson and language poets. Each volume develops its own poetics and maps a new geography of Alden Nielsen's long-standing poetic experiment. Widely recognized as an experimental poet, Nielsen's work defies rigid categorization. Reading across his proves that he is a poet constantly trying to refine his craft, to push the limits, the limiting constraints on lineation. This roundtable discussion will, I hope, engage some of the questions, issues, poetic and political, as well as the aesthetic transgressions and innovations that can be found in the poetry. The 3 participants are longtime readers of Alden's. Joseph Thomas is also a poet. He's a ferocious scholar of children's literature.
For ferocious children.
I am, I think, a friend and a colleague who has shared battle space many times with Alden. I'm also the editor of the manuscript back pages, New and Selected Poems by Alden Nielsen. Richard, a longtime friend, Richard Flynn, conference organizer, a longtime friend of Alden's, also an important scholar of American poetry, He is a phenomenal guitarist and a founding member of the soul-shaking, the Big Tenors Bad Tenors Blues Band with Alden. All right. In the words of David Brumage, quote, "What Bogart was to crime flicks, Nielsen is to postmodern poetry, a conscious and a court jester by turns," end of quote. Comedic, tragic, politically and socially conscious, acerbic, profound, dizzying, effective. His is poetry to return to, often and always, for answers and questions. And then there's the music of and in the lines. And that's my contribution. Because if you've ever had a conversation, offline, online, in person, with Alden Nielsen, you know how much he lives for the music. He's always learning to play a new instrument, has multiple types of guitars and horns, has a record collection that makes me jealous, and that he carries around the newest and smallest technology possible. In so many ways, he's fluent in musicianship and musicology, and he never settles. There's one word to describe his craft: literary, poetic, critical, musical. It is courage. Aesthetic, political, creative, essayistic courage. And that is why so many of us gravitate towards him, to catch a glimpse of what it could mean for us. Slow blues, ever developing. And the poetry of Alan Nielsen testifies to a life spent in what he calls in the poem Cavalry, a boogie-woogie crew. A life crafting poetic lines for an extended musical score, staff notations traversing Dylan, Miles, Sun Ra, via James Brown and Gil Scott-Heron. The music of the lines is more than elusive. It doesn't just name names or styles. It is love, an unguarded, alarming art that vibrates through volumes like a long quest, a musical idea to delineate, an ooh baby baby to expand upon slowly. And therein lies the miracle of the music for Alan Nielsen, an astute listener, an archivist of sonic exploration. In the poem, The Way We Listen Then, he explains the lost art of listening and the process of taking the space in. He explains how he learned from the Dells to stay in his corner while listening, while learning his soul and blues rhythms, while determining what his corner would be and sound like. He remembers learning from Pretty Polly Polson and Freakin' Freddy Frawley, from Keith Moon's generational percussive didacticism, from James Brown and the famous Flames moves, from Pharaoh's dance, he learned to run the voodoo down. From Jimi Hendrix groove, he's drawn from fire, he got the mastery of craft. That's the training to get the Sun Ra for the poet. As he concludes the poem, he writes, raised on rhythms, we were the ones who knew, we knew, for hearing the ones who knew more. Like his clarinetist to learn the scale so that he could find all the notes, Alan Nielsen is in constant pursuit of those who know more, and he can summon them in and for the poetry. For instance, in the poem The Retiring of Sonny Rollins, from the devastatingly beautiful and tragic Tray, Alan proceeds to poeticize how Rollins sounds through an alliterative riff composed of cascading SS phonemes meant to evoke the Colossus, one of Rollins' seminal albums and compositions. Quote, towering horns, seizing ships, sunny sounds, is altitudes. Or in the last stanza, waves roll as Rollins descends, Rollins resumes. The experience of the poem is sonic, thematic, and historiographic all at the same time. This multi-layered approach to poetic composition is a feature of the work that never obscures the poem. And every volume subtends the art of the music. It's not just about blues and jazz. Brand New Beggar, for instance, contains Nebraska ballads for his father and his childhood, love songs from Anna, certainly an understandable recurrence throughout the and other small songs for Stan Brakhage or Gil Scott-Heron. Still, you can tell that Alan Nielsen has been in class with Baraka, for his poetry continues to look for chances to give examples that illuminate what it means to be raised on rhythms. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to talk about pretty much the early Alan Nielsen, since I was intimately involved in the production of his first chapbook, which is Heat Strings from Sultan of Swat Books. This was a small press that Hugh Walthall and I and Lillian Weber worked on, and we've only published 3 books, and one was Beth Joslow's April Wars, and the second was Joan Retallack's first book, Circumstantial Evidence, and then this chapbook of Alvin's. I also I would revise the title of this panel to it's a roundtable discussion on the poetry of Alvin Lynn Nielsen, but his poetry name is actually A.L. Nielsen.
Okay.
And originally, when I first met A.L. in 1979, he was publishing his poetry under the name A.L. with no Nielsen. And I guess he thought better of that. I wanted to open, since I'm vain anyway, I wanted to open by reading a poem from Heat Strings that's dedicated to me. It doesn't have, it's not really about me, but it's dedicated to me. I think maybe because I caught the Twain reference, I don't know. The poem is called The Recent Carnival of Criticism in Connecticut. And it recalls some days of yore when the Center for Criticism was in Connecticut as well. So I'm gonna read this poem. I know he probably would read it better, but I'm gonna read it. So, the recent Carnival of Criticism in Connecticut. We had no rumors when Mandy came, so there was no livestock in the corral where we put her up in the shadow of the silo and forgot about her until the snow began to smell. We didn't know when her twins had arrived or how, though there had been a traveling band in the county some months previous with brass fittings and a bass drum. Deacon found them, the twins, thumping around our crawl space of a Sunday, both unwashed and one with a single clothespin clamped to each cheek. The better to tell the one from the other was how Mandy explained it. She had that way of talking, we learned, though the how of that got by us too, since each shared alike their mother's rose-worn sheets. When it came time to name them, we called one easily confused, the other inadvertently, but then one night in a drunk, Mandy crushed one and unpinned the other, and that was the end of it. We had no hope of knowing which was which afterwards. Deacon spoke on that three Sundays running, holding the surviving child up to us as a symbol of whatever. Deacon was always finding signs in things. Other people wouldn't give a second look, save for the simple freakishness of the thing. But then Deacon was the kind of man who would walk 5 miles through the snow to return a phone call, and rumor had it he studied nights by the flicker of a premonition. Set out beside the slate, he outlined his speeches with a cold coal. So when he shacked up with Mandy, that at least was no surprise. He had brass fittings of his own for all his asceticism. But when in 5 months, Mandy dropped a child identical to his precursors in every detail, we all agreed Deacon was taking this thing too far, even if he was making a new woman of her. We read him out of meeting for it finally. That's when Mandy and him set up their example factory, and soon enough salesmen were turning up all over the county with suitcases full of the things, inviting themselves in everywhere and making everybody genuinely uncomfortable. Wasn't but one thing to do after that. We deconstructed our barns and sent our daughters to Colorado. That would have stopped all the sales to the salesmen, all right, but it didn't slow down Deacon and Mandy any. They had it in mind to corner the market on paradigms, was what Doc Waters said. Well, we weren't about to sit still for that, so we all got up and moved to New Haven. Last we heard of Deacon and Mandy, they'd taken a bath and had to eat their inventory. Doc Waters said, it just goes to show you, but before he could say what, we took a vote and killed him. Didn't want that mess to get started up again. Then we all went to the carnival. This is my relationship with this book is that Lillian Weber and I actually, in the days when you did have computer typesetting, but you couldn't really generate the pages that way, we pasted the poems down by hand in the Writers Center out here in Glen Echo, is where it was produced. I wanted to talk also about one, and then I'm going to temporarily hand it on. We're going to try to have a conversation, but I wanted to talk about a feature of Alvin's poetry that I really love. And we used to be in, I forget what kind of car it was, one of those foreign jobs, maybe a Toyota or something like that, but we used to drive around, and I noticed he had a little clip to his, those things that, what do you call those? Visor, yeah. He had clipped it in a little notebook, and every so often, you know, if the mood struck him, he'd write down little things in his notebook that would eventually make it into poems. And one of the this is a book called Stepping Razor, and one of the things that I really like about his work is the way he plays with what he calls in this book exemplary sentences. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but
Don't read number 2, 9.
2, 9, 14, 17, or 18. All right.
Very coordinated.
Yeah.
I'm just reminding him we talked about this earlier.
Yeah. He looked forward to the day many years later when he would look back upon this day with a sense of foreboding. Thousands of spectators at the air show looked on in horror as he began to list dangerously. Yeah, that was a good one. Let's see. 18. No, I'm not going to be at 18. I'm not going to steal your thunder.
They're all good sentences.
Yeah.
Exemplary.
But not 17. If we had it to do all over again, we'd have it to do all over again. Well, I have some stuff I wanted to talk about from Vex, but I'm going to hand it over to Joseph for a minute.
Yes, I met Alden through this guy, and if you all know, he's a marvelous critic, a scholar, a writer of prose, poetry. He's okay as a musician. But I wanted to read some of his poems too. This one comes from the book Tray, which was published by Make Now, a journal out of LA, who published my book of poetry, Strong Measures, available at finer bookshops. And they got their start as a press that published conceptual poetry. And we all know Alden's a great fan of conceptual poetry. So I'm going to read one of his poems. One of the things I really like about his poems, he's got a great sense of humor, obviously, and he's wonderful at writing short poems. And we all love short poems, right? So this one is a very short poem. It's called The Poet in the Age of Electronic Reproduction. Is this thing on? Or you can read it. That's the whole poem. It works better if you have a microphone. I won't read that one again. I'm going to read one from Vexed as well, which is, I think, the best title ever. And of course, it's short too. Vexed text. It's a vexed text, and the book ends with a black rectangle on which, in negative space in the color of the page, are the words "No vehicles beyond this point." This is kind of a concrete poem, and underneath that are the words "The end of the road for metaphor." And that's the end of the book. Fine.
That equals out his tenor sax.
That's right. Let's see. Oh, and then I wanted to read this. This is a love poem, and it's a abecedarian poem, the start of an abecedarian book that Alden never wrote or intended to write. And this one is A. A is for Anne, is the first line, but the poem's called Anna, and it reads like this. And this is one of the things I love about this poem is it asks you. You should try to. It works great on the page. You have to ask yourself how you're going to read this thing. So I'll read it maybe a couple of different ways. But it goes Anna. A is for Anne. Other. Part of our name. A. Part or conjoined, we remain. An article. Or you could read it, A is for an other part of our name. Apart or conjoined, we remain, an article. And then you can read it. A is for an other part of our name. A part or conjoined, we remain, an article. So it's a dynamite little poem, and beautiful poem. I imagine about a beautiful woman. And then lastly, I'm going to read. This is from way back when we first started talking and hanging out. This is a poem that he contributed to a magazine I was putting together with some friends while we were in graduate school. The magazine's subtitle was formerly known as La Bourgeoisie, but it never was known as La Bourgeoisie. It was always formerly known as, and this one, I think the actual name of the issue is Swami. And this is his poem. It goes back to where we started with conceptualism. This is a poem about appropriation. The theme of the issue was appropriation. And I think this poem is as good as anything Kenny Goldsmith hasn't written. So it goes like this. The Art of Appropriation, that's the title. The Art of Appropriation. isn't hard to master.
Okay, I don't know how I follow that up, but no, I thought that we could maybe speak to the many ways of reading the poetry and what we look for when we read, because at different times in the same volume, right, you look for different things, right? For instance, I had this I think it's in Key Strings when he has this poem about Yvette, right, 1955, right, that riffs on the Alice Walker story. And you have this poem about appropriation, right? And then you have next to it a poem that is hilarious. And when you put that side by side, you have, almost you have a blues experience. It's almost a laughing to keep from crying every time you read. So I think we can engage the audience also in this question, but what do you look for when you read the poetry?
Well, so you really put your finger on the way what happens in the volumes and sort of that vary between the serious tender, also the serious political,
right,
and the playfulness,
right,
that occurs. So, I mean, when I was since I was putting this conference together, when I was sort of preparing for this talk, I reread Trey, and I thought just the title poem, I was really struck by the power of that poem.
And it got started as a series of Facebook posts.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, my friend and former student, Ara Sharinian, who started the press, contacted you because he liked, they were just poems he was writing about Trayvon, and he contacted Alden and said, we would love to publish this. It became a book. So they were intended. I mean, they started off as the kind of 21st century version of that notebook on the sun visor, where he was just writing down sentences, ideas, riffing on the titles of or what do they call them, headlines, news headlines, and the like. And it became it's such a moving book. If you haven't written it, you ought to. If you haven't read it, you ought to.
The art of appropriation.
That's my next book. It's going to be this one. And this little guy here, this is the Assembly of God at Jasper.
Oh, God.
And this is a really moving poem, and it still has some of those humorous moments, and then some standout moments, like the last line of this of one of the sections called Race Record. It's about Sun Ra, and the last line is just triumphant. But after the poem, I won't read the whole poem, but the last line is when they opened the doors to release him, Sun Ra walked out, and it's a beautiful, powerful, proud poem. So he does manage in a way that few poets do. To create these very short, humorous poems, longer, moving poems, tender poems. It's quite a roller coaster getting through one of his books. And sometimes you're laughing, you're like, oh, I shouldn't be laughing at this. But that is the heart of the blues, slings and music.
Your poem, the poem you just mentioned, is a very good example, because for those who haven't read it, the entire poem is about scenes of racial violence.
Yeah.
And in a way, when you've read Trey and you read the poem you just mentioned, Jasper, right, in the poem becomes a motif, right, that evokes, like Trey, a history of racial violence. The Jasper of James Byrd, right? And then another example.
And also the birth of Sun Ra.
Exactly, but that's the triumphant, right? I think the word you use is excellent. Triumph at the end, right? Out of all of that, right? The jailing of the man who will go on to become Sun Ra because of his refusal to go in the military. But that's the end of the poem. What precedes it are all of those moments of racial violence.
And it's in this. It's actually collected, I think, in Mixage.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it revised at all? The version in here?
I don't remember.
I don't think so. I think it's pretty close to it.
I think that one is not revised.
Yeah.
The triumph at the end is that we get Sun Ra, right? We get Sun Ra out of that, so that, I mean, and it's a feature of the poetry, I think, in general, to find these moments of light and of illumination in the profound darkness of our times. And I mean, the people who follow him on Facebook know that, you know, the sort of writing techniques that went into trade continue today. You know, those short poems, and even when it's not his poetry, I mean, he will quote a line of blues, or he will quote a poet saying something, and not in an act of appropriation, but this musical quotation becomes a poet in and of itself. When you put it together, there is a poem that is constantly being written and rewritten. And I think this is, I mean, a lot of people here follow him on Facebook, and they know what I'm talking about. But this, I mean, it's almost on a daily basis where you become part of a poem that is being written. And, you know, you're being privy to an experience that is unfolding and being unpacked before your very eyes. It's the same effect when you read the book, each book, because each book is special, is different in its approach, and it's different in its perspective as well.
Yeah, he is really an approachable poet, you know, especially as one that's been characterized as a kind of language-oriented writer. And I love language poetry, but there is a sense. I mean, there's a titanic intelligence behind these poems, and sometimes
Titanic sink.
yeah, it's going to speak tonight. But
Hear my God to thee.
they're really elusive too. So I'm always thinking I'm missing something. Every once in a while you get a reference. They're just wonderful poems. I thought I should read a couple more of those exemplary sentences, since I didn't let Richard read them, so we gotta hear them. This is number 2. The atmosphere was thick with thickness. When I told you I was lying yesterday, I didn't mean it. She was pregnant with feeling 9 months precisely from the day he had given her pause. And this is the 18. Will the owner of the blue horizon please remove it from the handicapped area? You guys know what a horizon is. Yeah. Now tell me you heard that. Did you hear that language, or did you make that
That's
word?
the only found thing. It was spoken to me by a speaker in the ceiling of a Walmart.
Yeah, okay.
We know where he gets his inspiration.
Walmart poems.
I heard a line like that at a wedding.
Yeah.
The person took the microphone away from the MC of the night and said, "Will the owner of a Toyota Corolla?" I mean,
So, can we ask if any folks in the room know Alden's poetry?
Use that against you again, and I always find that to be very instructive. And the same thing that you guys are getting at too, with the constellation, you know, involving constellation of like Easter eggs throughout the entirety of the work, and you start to pick them up and put the patterns together, and it becomes like a constellation that crosses all the different poems within the book, and it gives it cohesiveness and thematic development that is significant and meaningful.
it's certainly poetry that makes you work, right? If you want to. Right? When you want to, I mean, the end of the poem, "The Assembly of God" at Jasper, ends with the following lines, right? The allusion is to Lipscomb. You know who that is? No? Well, I mean, maybe when I read the lines, you will. So the assumption is Lipscomb played jackknife, collapsed against the neck of that instrument, never let go that knife, died a natural death, right? I mean, so the poem ends, you know, Sun Ra just came out of prison, right? Became Sun Ra, and then you have this going back to the blues, right? Where Mance Lipscomb used to play slide guitar with a knife, the back of a knife, right? So in that image, you also have, you know, a defiance of, and a rejection of the stereotype of the knife-wielding black man, right? And instead, the knife-wielding black man becomes a musical, you know, inspiration for the guy who was just kicked out, released from prison. So,
For being a pacifist.
For being a pacifist, right? And that's why, you know, the knife is not violent, right? The knife becomes an instrument for music. So if you want to work, but if you want to read those lines for what they are, they remain, you know, hard-hitting, I mean, lines of poetry. But if you want to work a little bit and give him a taste of his own medicine, then you can analyze the lines to show how, you know, each poem becomes a congregation of various histories, you know, cultural history, musical history, historiography, history of racial tensions in the United States, and all of those come together in a poem that is not supposed to be about that, right? But always remains entrenched in this desire to write songs. I think, and maybe some of you know him more than I do, will correct me there, but I think that there's a repressed songwriter, right?
There's a repressed ...
songwriter, because those are lyrics, and the music's just waiting to be. Well, you know him more, right?
Well,
that, you know, you're a bad tenor.
I'm a bad tenor, but yeah, I'm not sure I can respond to that right now. I always like to, you know, we're into pretty serious territory, and I always want to go to the more hilarious side of the work. I mean, I'll never, there's a poem in Vex called Instructions for the Magic Frog, for instance, which is a completely found poem from badly translated toy instructions, and it goes like this: this product is sticky like soft rubber. Tongue is extendable, capable of sucking object at long distance. Even though it is sticky, it is unlike bubble gums and can be pulled up easily. Wash it by soap in the event of stickiness decreased. The insect picture on the cover can be cut off along the coarse lining and play upon by sticking onto it. It is composed of oil and stain. If stick onto clothes, wall, or other important matters, it may stain your goods. Pull it backward using both hands, then release. Subsequently, wrist movement must be wide enough. Stretch as if it is a fishing rod capable of extending far. It will maintain its original shape no matter how you are going to treat it. Attention. Don't throw it out onto people's face. Don't go to places nearby fire. Harmless, but do not eat. Don't pull out its tongue, otherwise it would fall off.
So you see why scholars of children's poetry like this guy.
That may be it.
Yeah. So tell us about lower limits.
Oh yeah, I did bring. I was looking for my collection of lower limits speech, which was a zine, Xerox zine that Alvin did in the '90s. Really, only the '90s, or only the '90s. Yeah. I mean, I was looking for it. I actually pulled up this one. I had this one in my shelf of publications because I had a poem in it, so I was able to grab this issue. But it's, if anybody hasn't seen this, I'm welcome to come up and take a look at it. But there were, but wasn't evacuation routes part of this or not?
At some point, I started doing an upper limit series.
Yeah.
It was just one person.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was one of those.
Yeah.
So that's Dukowski, of course, right?
Yes.
Lower limits.
Yeah. So I
Which
mean,
is all the algebra I've done.
yeah. I mean, there were some well-known people. Harriet Mullinad stuff in here, and we've got Sheila Murphy, Stephen Radcliffe. I mean, there's some.
It looks like the kind of thing a high school student would put together.
Exactly.
But it's got real poetry in it.
One person suggested I should call it the type fonts of the poets.
Yeah,
Because the cover has the suggestion that it was going to be an actual folded zine. He's like, fuck that. He just he
would send it out this way, but then he would send you some contributors' copies flat. That's how I did it.
How many issues did you do?
I don't know.
You don't know? You don't remember?
I should scan them all and put them on.
That's right.
This is number 5. So,
There's more than a dozen, but
yeah. And I have them someplace.
Oh, and also, when we started doing, well, I said we, when I started doing the single poet ones, I approached a couple of my friends here in DC about being authors of some, Mark Wallace, and huh?
I was just
Oh, I was trying to remember the other one. And they just decided, Buck Downs, I think. They just decided to do them as little booklets. They produced them themselves. And I never mind. So a couple of those are actual little chapbooks.
I didn't realize you and Mark were doing those did that together. Were you and Mark were doing that together? I didn't realize you had.
No. It's just that they decided to just. I asked them if they wanted to do one of the single author ones, and they said, "Well, why don't we just actually physically do it?" So they did.
Sort of like when you sent in your poem and you had put a little witch sticker on it and it just got printed just like that.
Whatever people said, that's how it showed up. Not everybody got in.
That's comforting to know.
Yeah.
I was curious. Earlier, I talked about what do you look for in the poetry, and I guess we all have the same experience in similar, in different ways, I guess. That when we started preparing for this roundtable, we just started picking up books at random pages, right? And to me, that's a feature that is not. It's not something that I do often with poets, where I usually try to begin on page 1. But what I like about Alden's poetry is that you can pick it up on page 50 of, you didn't hear this from me, and then you pick page 20 of Brand New Beggar, and then there's a different experience every time. And some of them are prescriptive, excuse me. Thinking about Sour Grapes here. The first one, you read that and you go, yep. There's always someone who gets to make love more often than you do. Someone who holds the position you should hold, with the lover you should hold. When you are younger and far better looking, someone who is promoted when you are older and wiser. Always someone has more and better friends than your own, brazen for ideas you abandoned long ago. that to me is prescription. Yeah. It's the kind of didacticism I'm looking for in poetry.
You didn't read the last line.
Oh, I know. If I can read the entire thing, yes. Always someone has the home you should have had, filling it with children who will become all the children you don't have should have been. Someone better spoken than you, born to a more interesting time, probably to outlive you, who has 2 interesting personalities to each of your dull ones. I thought I should introduce myself. Don't think I haven't appreciated it. Oh, man.
Yeah. So maybe now that we've got Alden here in the room, what's our of Make Now was telling him about this cover. He wasn't sure he wanted that to be the cover. He said you were insistent, and
As I tend to be.
Yeah, but then your next book too has a guitar on the cover,
And the one before.
and the one. Yeah. So what's
up?
Yeah, what's up with the guitars?
Will you pay for them?
Yeah.
There's a quartet, and the fourth one doesn't have a publisher. And then maybe I'll put other instruments on the cover. But no, the one tray in particular, I'd always wanted to have a hoodie on the cover, right? Because of the subject matter. Well, then, Claudia Rankin's wonderful what came out with a hoodie on the cover. So why would I can't do that now? But then I thought of combining the two. Now, anyone who plays guitar will notice something funny about the cover, and that's the strings are backwards. And that's because the artist couldn't get the hoodie on the front without reversing the image. So it's like a left-handed guitarist like Albert King, who never changed the strings or something.
Hendrix goes country blues, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Libet Cotton was around all the time.
Yeah, he was left-handed.
I played your guitar at the Smithsonian. It's in the storage racks in the Smithsonian. And I saw one was left-handed, a wear pattern on it. And I said, "Is that who I think this is?" Yeah. So I played freight train.
Wow.
I had to do it.
I think if I remember, she was here because the Seeger family lived here and she worked for them or something like that.
Actually, she had it, strung normal for a right-hander, but she played it upside
Yeah,
down.
that's right.
So yeah,
As does Albert King.
I remember seeing her down at the Folklife Festival more than once, down at the mall here. That's the thing. My association with Alden, I think, really centers on this city. Is pretty much. I mean, I grew up here, and he pretty much grew up here. Yeah. So
Now, the last one has a harp on it too.
yeah, that's right.
The one that's not published yet is called Spider Cone. Anyone who plays one of those knows.
Yeah. Wow.
When did you guys meet?
We met in 1979, and we met at the Red Lion, which is a bar down near GW. The Red Lion, a lot of things happened at the Red Lion. That what happened there should stay there.
It's the Red Lion.
Yeah, but I got my bachelor's at GW, and I went up to American and got a master's with creative writing emphasis, and then decided to come back to GW for my doctorate, and keep a full-time job at the same time, because I had an infant son at this point. But not when I met Alvin in '79, which is the year before, and he was starting at GW, and we had friends that introduced us, and then we just ended up being kind of like best buds in grad school. And
Well, we were the only two who cared about contemporary poetry.
that's true. Yeah.
But did you have like conflicting aesthetic sensibilities back then? Because you weren't into.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
We had overlapping.
Yeah.
He's more the whole bishop and I'm more the language poet.
But it was yeah. I mean, it was interesting. You know, there was a lot of. We would always be going to poetry events. Yeah, and at the Library of Congress, at the Folger, and afterwards we drink beer. Yeah. So you know, we'd go to a lot of things, and it was pretty nice. So that's what 41 years ago.
Were you guys playing music together right at the beginning?
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Well,
that developed?
not right at the beginning.
First, I don't think he knew I played, but
Right.
we were over at your house in Arlington, and you had a guitar in your basement. I picked it up and played it a little bit. But okay, here's the story for you. Those of you from out of town might not know there's a Pacifica radio station here, WPFW. And Grace Cavalieri for many years has had a poetry show on there. And like all Pacifica stations, they have to have fundraisers. And she got the idea of having a poetry and music fundraiser at a hotel not far from here.
Yeah.
And so I went over to Mr. Wise on Rhode Island Avenue Northeast on their open, well, nobody called it open mic then, but a jam session. And I sat there at the bar drinking and listening until I heard exactly what I wanted to hear, which was a band doing an amazing version of Giant Steps with the guitar playing the lead.
Oh yeah.
So I went over and I said, look, there's this thing. Here's what it is. I'll just read one quick poem and get out of the way, and you guys can have the rest of the time. They said, sure. So I'm calling them up ahead of time to make the, oh, our drummer got a paying gig. So go back to Mr. Wise, sit around. These two young women from Howard University get up, a flute player and a conga drummer. They sounded pretty good. So I went over and made the same pitch. They actually came over to my apartment, and we worked out a couple of things. It was just the two of them. I played guitar and I moved over the pieces. Morning of the event, one of them calls me up and says, oh, the other one's got the flute. Oh, I said, well, can you just come and play the conga? I'm too bashful, by the way. I start calling Richard's phone. You were at the beach. I finally get through to him. I said, get your guitar, get your amp, meet me at this hotel. We get there. No idea. So puts his stuff up there. I said, play something like Jimmy Reed and E, and that was it. And then they invited us to play at the Arts Festival downtown.
I PDF'd the clip from the Washington Post talking about the country blues stylings of Richard Flynn and
My only mention in the
Yeah.
Washington Post. But yeah, the Vintage Blues Band was actually a sort of a parody. We did a fundraiser for, was this some student group or something?
Oh no, you did.
At the-
We did
the
a
Red
talent
Skiller.
show. The freshman dorm.
Well, that was later.
Oh,
First,
yeah.
we were at the Red Skiller raising money for something. Maybe it was the writers group.
Oh yeah.
And then we did the talent show outside Thurston Hall. Came in second place.
And we.
To a Billy Joel entertainer.
I mean, one of our big debut was at my 30th birthday party in my house. So we had.
Oh, I will say at the Thurston Hall talent show, everyone was supposed to just play 2 songs. We started playing Heat Wave, and the young lady who was organizing that thing came on, play 3 songs.
Cool. We were just backing up a couple of young girls who were freshmen because it was a freshman dorm. You might have been one of their teachers, I think. I don't know.
Oh yeah, one of them had been in my freshman writing class.
Yeah.
There you go, life story.
But I'm curious, Joseph, you're an accomplished musician too. Do you see do you hear the music because I mean we can all hear his videos online and you go, okay, I mean there's still
Yeah, I think bass. I can't hear anything with high pitch.
But was it something that drew you to the poetry as well, the music, or?
I don't know. The whole music and poetry, lower limit, upper limit. I don't really. I mean, it sounds great, but it doesn't sound like music to me.
Okay.
You know, like when people talk about jazz poetry, and it doesn't just sound like jazz to me. It sounds like poetry. Written by people who maybe like jazz, I guess. But he's got a great ear for the language. I mean, and the way he puts things together sonically is just amazing, and how the oral qualities of the language, you know, resonate with the kind of semantic play. That's what that draws me to it. I just like with that one poem I was reading for Anna. I just love poems where you can choose to read them in different ways. The way the words fit together differently depending on, you know.
And there are many of them.
Yeah, and that's what he does
Yeah,
again and
throughout.
again and again. And I love it. You get more poetry for your buck.
Right.
More poetry for your buck.
I mean, vexed is verse extract, right? Yeah, so it's like, as well as being vexed.
Yeah.
That was one of the challenges when I think we can tell the story, right? When we were putting together the selected to give a sense of each book, but also a sense of the work in general, and to pick out certain poems at the exclusion of others. When you know that they make sense when you read the entire volume,
Yeah.
and then try to have them make sense in a decontextualized context.
Well,
Can
I don't want to
say that.
I remember years ago I was talking to Alvin, and he was telling me about how people will read his books and review his books when they bother to,
Yeah.
and how they
The
will
three
make
reviews.
but people will make claims about how you can see his developing voice or his changing concerns and how the books work as a textual artifact. And he was saying, you know, most of these books, there are poems in there I wrote in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. You know, it's all different poems from different times put together, and so it's not really a teleology.
It's not a snapshot of where he is at the
in
moment.
that moment.
Right? Yeah,
The book
exactly.
comes out in 1998 doesn't mean those poems are from that year.
It's very interesting because you never get that except perhaps from the beginning of Trey, with the context is clear.
Well, that's
Yeah.
that's one of the exceptions. These books were all written over that year. I mean, I don't know. Is there anything?
No, just the first part.
Just the first part. Yeah, just the first. And then the rest is like the other books.
Evan Golding asked me if I'd come to the end of everything being a selected, essentially. And I said, well, if I ever find publishers for the next two, then everything after that will be new, except it'll take me 5 years to get a publisher for that. And it's like,
Jean-Philippe, tell me about the selected, because I really hadn't heard about this.
Yeah.
because it's not published.
Yeah, it's not.
I know, but he's working on it.
It's done. It's done. I mean, we're shopping it, and yeah, we've sent it, and I mean, it's just something that I had mentioned to him in passing. I don't remember when, and I don't remember where.
But I remember it.
And then I get an email out of the blue, and I remember going, okay. I wasn't really sure how to do it, and then I just went back and reread everything, not really thinking about poems to select, but just trying to see a semblance of a story that we could tell with the selected. And the first thing I did, and you know the title of the book is Back Pages, an allusion to Dylan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that why this is called Series of Dreams?
Yes, that's me being
Originally,
cute.
you had both of those at the time.
Yeah, I wanted to be too cute, and it didn't really work. But what I did was that I started listening to Dylan.
Yeah.
I started listening to. I was trying to put together a playlist over an extended period of days, where that would give me a soundtrack to read the book. Right, so Dylan, Miles, and to be perfectly honest, it was easy because I could go on Facebook and every day he posted an album. So I mean, he basically tells you what to listen to that day. But I sort of went back to into my vinyls and listened to Dylan and Miles and Coltrane, Jimi Hendrix and James Brown. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like the book became possible. I didn't really know how I was going to put it together, except that I just wanted to read them again. And then a second time, and then every time I would finish one, I would say, okay, those are the poems that I think tell the story of that book, but I'm not sure yet. And then it just materialized quite quickly, where I sent the selection to Alden for approval, and then he added some, and
I made 2 or 3 changes.
yeah.
Really?
Well, they were recurrent. You know, there was something
Oh, yeah.
I wanted each book to have a poem about Anna. Because each book has a poem to me about her, and I wanted that story to be told as well. And I thought that the mix
This was
of
the book I wrote before I knew her, by the way.
but it certainly seemed like something was percolating. But
in Babes.
Yeah, like he has a poem in here called "My Dinner with Andrea" that's pretty funny. I know.
So what? So how many poems are in the book?
there are 200
More than 200 pages.
Yeah, 200 pages more. Yeah, and with a very, very short introduction because it's all the poetry that matters, and I think it's representative of the many. Also, I wanted to show the various formal experiments because as each of the poems that you've read show different approaches to semantics, to language. So I wanted to give a sense of what that could look like.
Well, there's what's the book, Exaltation of Forms? You guys know that book? You wrote the chapter on the Aleppo, and it
Right.
seems out of the blue for people who don't know, but it's not out of the blue. I mean, you are interested in constraints, and thinking about language in that way.
Constrained my whole life.
Yeah.
Well, you worked a lot on Aleppo, right?
Yeah,
You've done a
yeah.
lot of work on it. And I wrote a few articles in Christian Book, and then they said, it came to your work maybe sometimes through Christian Book. I was like, oh no, that's not something you should say to me. But I mean, I was also interested in those ideas of formal experiments, right? Not necessarily from the perspective that you would write academically on that, because it never occurred to me that this was available, but to represent that in back pages was important. Those formal.
Well, yeah, and in the Aleppo, the big debate has been whether you explain the constraints or the procedures that you're using, or whether you keep it invisible. And Alden has, talked about. I mean, I don't remember there.
Well, I once told somebody that in the end, when everything's published, if you count all the syllables and divide by pi, you get a certain number.
But I think you're the one, Joseph, who cued me into the link between Aleppo and the poetry. Not that I was looking for formal constraints, but I mean.
Well, as an example, an early thing like that, I think it was Richard who had written an alphabetical poem at some point. This is when I was working as a systems analyst, and so I had my computer program write a poem where every line is 26 characters and spaces, and it goes A, B, C, D to Z. And the joke was, well, see, the computer. Of course, I made the computer do that. But I'm interested in constraints. I'm just not constrained by them.
But I mean, the closest book that could approach that is evacuation routes, right? Where there's a motif, right? It certainly looks Aleppo-ish, right?
Well, I started that when I met David Bromwich, and he had just published Red Hats, which is a rearrangement of the word threads from one earlier. And looking at what I'd written so far, I thought this looks a little too much like what he just did. I was going to stop, and then David, God bless him, said, "No, keep doing." He didn't know what the final word was going to spell it. He just knew it was JS Buck, RU. So I've always been grateful that David kept me from not finishing.
I think we can open up the floor to questions or comments. We have the luxury, right, to have the poet in the house, which is not something that we do usually.
Yeah, I love poets.
So, questions, comments to us or to Alden or to
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you guys could maybe speak about the role of the humor, because you kind of mentioned like these kind of three sort of categories, kind of like the politics, the music, and the humor. And humor comes up in like the whole blues. But if you think like, you know, is there you find like a kind of politics to the humor, or different types of humor, or you know, what do you I mean, how do you find that integral to?
I guess to me, the humor is an antidote to the political, which is an antidote to something else. I don't think that I'm always hesitant to speak about the politics of humor, because I'm not sure that you need politics to be funny. I think you can just, because to me it defeats the cleverness of the lines and of the craft, right? To try to pin it to
Like explaining jokes, right?
Well, yeah, it's like explaining the joke or explaining the constraint, right? Essentially. So, sorry, I can't give you a better answer.
No,
but the other.
That was part of it. Yeah.
I got a response. I found a way to fit it in to your request. I know Al's work through Richard, and in preparing for this panel, I mean, I've heard it throughout our 20-year relationship, but recently it will go talking about it, what I want to talk about, and then he'll read to me. And he read Trey and took our time and paused, thought. There was verbal response, like, oh, you know, from me. And then there was the frog. It had to go to the frog. I really want to talk about this, and then he read the frog. And thank God, so I laughed, and I'm not gonna die. And then there's a story about the music, right? That starts with something that you played, and then it goes off and talks about other musicians. And that's so. I'm not really responding for you, Richard, but that's kind of how he, you know, when he's reading, that's how it works. You know, and I'm the audience, and I get to receive all of that.
Yeah.
So. Is that an answer about how you work that?
Oh yeah, no, I don't know. I was just wondering
that
because
stuff?
it keeps coming up, and obviously
Yeah.
listening to.
Well, it makes the books fun to read. I mean, and you know, these are very inviting poems. And you mentioned how folks have often kind of grouped them in language-oriented writers, or language writers, language poets, so-called language poets. But these are not stuffy, difficult poems. They're often challenging, but they're lively and fun poems. And any one of his books is a delight to read, even when and maybe even especially when the subject matter is very political or affecting, or you know, it has that humor that makes it possible to get through the book, as Becky is suggesting.
And for me, the humor also is like about those expectations and changing the context to highlight the disjuncture between what you think he's talking about, what he's maybe really talking about. One of my favorite funny ones that I don't know if it's in one of the books, it was at a poetry reading a couple of years ago. He said, I went to LA to make it big. I got there. It was already big. and like what's funny, and the risk of ruining the joke by analyzing it, like what's funny about that is that you think he's talking, you know, that you think the speaker in the poem is talking about himself, and then the context switches out, and we're always sort of immersed in our.
That's why we didn't say the word. Yeah, that's the title, Midnight Train to Georgia, which I hope the Gladys Knight kids recognize it. That was actually published in Poet Lore, which I understand is America's oldest continuous poetry magazine. Because I hadn't sent them anything for 40 years. And what did they take but the 2-line poem?
They pay by the line. Well, yeah. I mean, I was looking in. I mean, I lost the poem here, but the director's cut of Institutional Memory. I mean, it has really nice, pithy little. Let me see if I can give you a couple of examples here. Institutional Memory, the morning after, or whatever. 14. Is that it, or is that the? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so things like. he could read Pluto in the original. Or an argument for virtual reality. It may become more expensive to literally send your kids to school.
Yeah, and then at the Assembly of God, section 8, it's using similar techniques, but for it's just much darker. It's 3 couplets, and it reads: American English is a language in which there are no words for slavery. And it functions in a similar kind of way, but yeah,
but it hits hard.
that's right. Yeah.
Of course, I was thinking about this conference. I thought about another line from the former. Upon its publication, Understanding Poetry became an instant Bible for irritating a generation of university students.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? Perhaps a comment?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for this. It's probably symptomatic of my ego that on one hand I wanted to be here, but on the other hand I was so flustered I forgot to make the recording Kathy wanted, so I'm really happy. Because as people here know, I record everything and I forgot to even.
Yeah, I've always wondered, are you going to use that against us someday?
You also forgot to bring your guitars.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
But there is something vaguely posthumous about this, except I'm here. So I feel kind of like Huck Finn walking
Yes,
backwards
yes.
on his body. But yeah, I can't thank you guys and the people who came for this. I just can't thank you enough.
So it's Tom Sawyer, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Tom Sawyer,
No, but he's the one.
have to go
He
to
goes
the
to the
funeral.
funeral. Oh, is that what you're
Right.
saying? Yeah.
No, Huck Finn was still hiding out and watching them search for him, which is kind of like Disney.
Well, do you guys want to adjourn so we can go smoke a cigarette?
I think that on behalf of everyone here in the room who's read your work, Alden, and who's been inspired by it, and the people you've helped, and you've helped a lot of people, including myself, I think that this hour that we spent together is just a little bit of what we can give you, back. So it's our time to thank you for everything you've done, for your work. And then thank you, everybody. Thank you for